The Union fought for the North and opposed slavery and the Confederate States seceding. Union resources like manufacturing, railroads, and money far outstripped those of the Confederates. The population of the North, numbering 22 million, was more than double that of the South.
The Confederates only had a population of 9 million, which 3.5 million of those were slaves. They were highly motivated fighters protecting their rights, homes, and families. They had an easier task in the war. While the Union had to invade and conquer the South in order to reunite the nation, the Confederates just had to defend their massive territory and tire the Union of the fight. The Civil War was the deadliest so far in American history. It is considered the first modern war, meaning that never before had mass armies confronted each other with such deadly weapons and technologies. These new technologies include railroads, ironclad ships, the telegraph, and rifles.
Railroads were used to transport resources to the army and transport troops. Railroad junctions were now major targets of the military strategy. Ironclads revolutionized sea warfare. These ironclads were far superior to the older wooden ships, and this was first demonstrated in the first ironclad battle between the Union's Monitor and the Confederates' Merrimac. The rifle was the most deadly innovation of the war. It was far more accurate and could shoot much further than the musket, creating a need for fortifications and trenches.
The Confederates were led by the brilliant General Robert E. Lee, who took on a defensive strategy and occasionally made attacks into the North, hoping to weaken the North's morale. He was very successful early in the war in the East. The Union had weak leaders in the East who lacked military vision. However, in the West, the Union was led by Ulysses S. Grant, who was logical, daring, and developed excellent strategies. President Lincoln realized that the Union target must be slavery because it was the cornerstone of the South.
Slavery was the foundation of the South. At first, Lincoln did not consider slavery as something important to the war. He even allowed a document called the Crittenden Resolution to pass. This document said that the Union had no intention of interfering with slavery. Some of the leaders in the North would even return fugitive slaves back to their owners. After a while, Lincoln and the radical Republicans realized that slavery needed to be abolished in order to defeat the Confederates. Lincoln had the idea of emancipating the slaves under the Emancipation Proclamation because it was a military and political necessity in order to weaken the South. On January 1st, 1863, Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. At first, it did not emancipate all the slaves, only the slaves controlled by the Union. However, the document was a step to the end of slavery.
There were two turning points in the war. Gettysburg took place in Pennsylvania and is the largest battle that has been fought on American soil. General Lee led the Confederate Army at Gettysburg and was one of his only major losses. Vicksburg took place in Mississippi and involved General Grant launching a siege on the city of Vicksburg, which when surrendered on July 4, 1863, gave control of the Mississippi River Valley to the Union. In 1864, Grant and Lee battled it out in Virginia. There were many casualties because Grant knew that he could have a continuous attack due to his manpower, even if it meant many men died. On April 2, 1865, Grant broke through Lee's lines at Richmond and forced the Confederacy to abandon the city. This gave the Union control of the Confederate capital and marked the end of the war. That year, Congress also passed the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery throughout the Union and brought the words of slavery into the Constitution for the first time.
You are free! Woo! To blacks, freedom meant many things. It first meant the liberation from ownership and the injustices that came with it. It also meant the ability to have a structured family without the fear of being broken up. They also had the ability to have their own churches and schools, getting education to their children for the first time. A central point to blacks' definition of freedom was land ownership. However, most blacks did not own land and remained poor because there was no way to acquire land. As a result, former slaves would work for the previous owners and took part in sharecropping. Sharecropping was where someone could rent land on a plantation. In return, they would work the land and divide the crop between the owner and the sharecropper.
Andrew Johnson was the president to succeed Lincoln and planned presidential reconstruction. This plan included ideas to restore political and property rights to white Southerners. His plan also allowed the new corrupt governments to manage local affairs. In other words, he did not put restrictions on the new government. As a result of this, The Southern government came up with black codes. These were laws passed that were designed to regulate black lives. They restricted the freedom of blacks and almost reduced them to slaves. Opponents of Johnson and his plan were radical Republicans. They wanted to remake the Southern government that Johnson had established and wanted to modify his Reconstruction plan to give more rights to blacks. As a result, the 14th Amendment was created by Congress in June of 1868. It gave everyone born in the U.S. equal protection before the law. Johnson was impeached in 1868 because he violated the 10-Year of Office Act and was considered a failure by Republicans. The military hero, Ulysses S. Grant, was then elected by Republicans for president. After this, Congress adopted the 15th Amendment in 1869. It said that no state could stop someone from voting because of race.
Many Southerners, still bitter from the Civil War, opposed the amendments to the Constitution and the rights given to blacks. Southern whites started terrorizing blacks, attacking and assaulting them in order to keep them from exercising the rights they deserved, specifically the right to vote. The most prominent anti-black group was the Ku Klux Klan. It was a terrorist organization that indiscreetly worked for the Democratic Party. They viciously attacked Republican leaders, black or white. This attack on Reconstruction caused the North to no longer be as adamantly supportive for blacks' rights. As a result, the Democrats took control of the South once again, calling themselves Redeemers because they redeemed the South from black control. These opponents to the new belief of equality symbolized the end of Reconstruction.
In the 1870s, America experienced a massive economic growth period known as the Gilded Age. The idea of Lincoln's small farm country was lost, and now the country had factories and was mass-producing. Nearly 2/3 of Americans worked for wages. Railroads made the second industrial revolution possible. They created all the market for the goods being manufactured. Electricity was starting to be produced, which allowed for longer workdays and gave people power. Two men who rose to the occasion were Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller. These two men became captains of industry. Andrew Carnegie dominated the steel industry, and John Rockefeller had control of the oil industry.
The West was a very diverse region and changed greatly during the Gilded Age. People moved all the way to California to start farms. People also created bonanza farms, which were huge farms where many workers were employed. As a result, there was a mass production of crops coming into the cities. Unfortunately, as the whites moved into the region, the Indians' lives became more endangered. They were pushed off their land, and boarding schools were developed for Indian children to make them civilized. Americans did allow Indians to become citizens if they gave up their tribe, however most did not accept.
Humna, 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 humna.
At Wounded Knee, a tribe was performing a dance ritual. When officials heard this, they sent federal troops and killed almost 200 men, women, and children.
More and more people began to work for wages. People wanted more money, which caused many strikes and rebellions. Workers also demanded for a signed contract so that they knew what they would be paid. Courts knew that there were economic problems, but any cases that came to court, the court would usually side with the business that complained of loss of economic freedom. The Knights of Labor formed because of this issue. They tried to get men and women, blacks and whites, all to work together. They believed that most Americans had lost their economic freedom because of the unrestrained growth and corrupt politics of the times. Many people began to write novels about how America would either be destroyed or prosper because of the Gilded Age.
This was a time of trial, growth, and reconciliation in American history. The end.